What's up, everybody? We are back with another episode of Shooting the Shift, and today we're going to talk about all things second chakra. So for those of you who are unaware of the chakra system, the second chakra might be the most controversial of all the chakras because it's the storehouse of what we call the shadow. And so a lot of people have heard the term shadow work, but not everybody's super clear on what the shadow actually is. And so we can just say that the shadow is the storehouse of all of our rejected parts, the parts of the human that we dub as unacceptable, unworthy, unsavory. And what we try to do is we try to sever these parts of ourselves, and we can never sever our wholeness. We can basically just stuff it away and pretend it doesn't exist. But what that does is it creates a massive shadow aspect that will still bleed into our individual lives, into our collective lives. And so some of these aspects of the shadow are really difficult to talk about and make people feel all sorts of ways. You know, if I say the word sex, or I say, let's talk about sex and money, how does that make you feel? Right? So we want to talk about sex and money. That's what we want to talk about, the second chakra, and we want to talk about sex and money. So I'm glad you guys are here, and you're in for a good one. So my first question for Nicole would be, what are the emotions that come up for you today around the topic of sex, and are they the same as they were prior to your awakening to higher consciousness?
They definitely are not the same as beforehand, before evolving into a higher consciousness, because, and actually on money, topic on money, it's something that I ask my clients and people all the time, because there's this stigma around money. So when you say, how does money make you feel? Money makes me feel happy now. Before, it made me feel very angry. I would get super angry paying the bills. The kids would clear out of the house. Mom's paying bills, everybody leave, right? Because it was not something that I embraced. It was the beliefs that I inherited and adopted around money from ancestors were that, you have to work harder, longer, you have to do more, to make more, to be more. You had to be better, you had to do better, you had to do more, and all these things. And sex too, shameful, shame, shame, shame. We're not talking about any of that. If you can't even talk about it, how do you learn anything? How do you convey any kind of emotional empowerment to your children if you can't talk about sex with them?
How do you break the stigma associated with those things? Exactly. How do you develop a healthy relationship to things that are so vital in our world as sex and money, and how they intimately relate to a pleasurable experience? So the second chakra is the power side of it, is pleasure. Money can bring you pleasure, and so can sex. They can be incredibly pleasurable, but the flip side, the shadow side, is guilt. So how many times, and this is a perfect question to ask yourself as a catalyst for your own awakening,
guilt, shame, fear.
Exactly. What are the emotions?
The power that comes up, control. Again, if you don't feel empowered, you want to control.
Absolutely.
And if you are controlling when it comes to money or sex, we have all of these things that happen.
And these are the things that humans struggle with the most, right? Is like the problem isn't really in our spiritual centers. Our spiritual centers aren't really having a problem. The problem is the lower self of humanity that needs to, or it doesn't need to do anything, but we might have a more peaceful, more loving world, more balanced world if we could bring those lower energy centers into vibrational balance, which would be to awaken to the duality of pleasure and guilt. And this is just one level of human consciousness we're talking about here. We have many levels that we'll go into in future episodes, but today we just want to talk about the second chakra, how it gets out of balance, and maybe some of the things that we can do to welcome it back into balance. And to what you said earlier, a lot of this is, it's inherited. A lot of these beliefs that we have about sex and money, they're not necessarily ours. We didn't develop them on our own. Just like you said, today you look at money and it makes you feel happy. It probably makes you feel free. You can do the things you enjoy if you have the money to do those things.
It's options.
Yeah. Yeah. So so let's talk about some of the benefits of the things that we've kind of been conditioned to feel shame about. Let's talk about the benefits of having money and having good sex. There's a lot of good. There's a lot of good that can come from those things. Should we start with sex or money?
Sex.
All right. We could start with sex.
Good, yeah.
All right. So what are some of the benefits of sex? Have you ever heard of sex magic?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Cool. Is it
Everybody should practice it.
Yes. Yeah. So sex can actually lead you into this expanded state of consciousness where you are actually
It's creational.
Bingo. Yeah. So second chakra, they say it's one of our most creative energy centers. We literally create life. Life
Right.
is created. Yeah.
Birth life from that. And you can't just do sex magic. There's that process of like the energies and building those energies up. And if you have a partner that's working with you, we get into the base things versus the beneficial things where you can be one-sided and be controlling and vampiric about it. I don't recommend it. But when you have somebody that's working with you and increasing the energies, whether they're working with you in the magical sense or working with you on that spiritual level for you to create and do what you are intending to do. So there's that. They don't have to be fully involved in what you're creating magically.
Oh, so too, like the difference between, absolutely.
But them being involved.
You're facilitating that state
Together.
of consciousness together. Yes. Exactly. It's a unified. So there's like that. The polarity of the second chakra is almost like this give and take exchange of energy. And that's kind of like you were saying, that manipulative sort of controlling sexual experience. But there's a higher degree available to us through the sexual experience that is unified, because in that state of consciousness, if two people have that peak sexual experience, all of a sudden there is no body, there is no concept of self, there is just pure bliss and ecstasy in a moment,
in a unity, because the reciprocating energies have built and concentrated to that point. And you've got to get over the piece where if one of you is constantly giving, so you got to get rid of the people pleaser thing in that. You have to allow yourself to feel the pleasure, work with the pleasure, and also create this exponential expansion of energy between two people, giving and receiving equally.
Yes.
So
yes. And it creates so much pleasure when it's balanced. Life is better in balance.
Harmony.
Yes.
It's a harmony.
It's a unified, it's like, the peak experience of the sexual encounter is the unifying of opposites, right? Like taking two people who experience themselves separately as individuals to come together, to merge, and actually offer this potential to create something new. Like, biologically with a male and a female, they can come together to actually create life. But aside from biology, two human beings as separate can enter into this state of consciousness that creates a new dimension from the experience of separation. So sex can be incredibly magical in that way, that it really can unify two people into a whole new expanded state, right?
Absolutely. And when you can get into that level of creating together and being, it's almost like this expansion blows open, and like the universe just opens up, right?
Like a
And
portal.
you're connected. Yeah, it is. It can be very magical.
It is. It can be like that portal into another realm of consciousness. And we were also talking about, before we started filming, we were talking about the different aspects of the second chakra and how it can express itself healthfully, but also in a way that's incredibly diseased. And this is what makes the second chakra the most difficult to even talk about, because there's a lot of wounding that has occurred at the level of the second chakra because of human involvement with pleasurable experiences, not just sex and not just money, but anything that purports to provide us with the experience of pleasure. And pleasure by its nature is temporary gratification. It's different. That may be a conversation for another time, the difference between pleasure and happiness. But because we're talking about the second chakra, like what are some other ways that people seek out pleasure? It's not just through sex and money. All those are really big ones. But people shop, they gamble, they like food. Think about our relationship to food. Like we eat
Drugs, alcohol.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
And that's all related to the second chakra and this biological human desire to feel good. But maybe we've kind of lost touch a little bit with what it means to feel good in a holistic, wholesome way. And instead we've become obsessed with seeking pleasure, which has created this radical imbalance within many individuals. But also on the flip side is it's created a catalyst for this shift into higher consciousness, the unified awareness that's causing us to realize we need balance, right? Radical imbalance creates the awareness of, oh, maybe I could do some balancing here. So what would excessive energy look like in the second chakra? Like say someone has too much, right? So we want a chakra to be balanced. We want to be able to take energy in and send energy out and find connection with another person.
A flow.
Exactly. And a healthy second chakra's got a nice ebb and flow, give and take. It's a unified experience between two people. Even this is technically it's a fifth chakra communication, but this isn't a flowing experience. But what happens when the second chakra gets out of balance? When there's too little energy. We were talking about this a little bit. This was my experience growing up. We inherit these ideas about sex and money. When it came to the topic of sexuality, I was taught, and many, many, many others, especially if you were raised religious, you don't talk about it.
No. Shameful.
Exactly. It's shameful. You shouldn't want sex. You shouldn't want pleasure. And so isn't that confusing to a human being who's biologically wired for the pleasurable experience? We would not have all of these sense organs, pleasurable sense organs, if we weren't meant to experience them. So then it creates this dichotomy or this split between I biologically desire pleasure, but now there's this conscious mind or this programming that says I shouldn't have it. So what are some of the ways that we can maybe heal our relationship to that? Maybe start by having conversations that create the space. Like what was it like for you? Did you grow up with negative associations with sex or money or anything second chakra?
Yeah, there was you didn't talk about it. There was shameful, like you don't touch yourself, don't even look like you're doing anything, or it's just put some clothes on.
Yeah.
Kids love to run around naked, right? And if you learn at that young age that if you're running around, that you should not be doing that. I mean, I remember my sister, we used to call her the streaker. And, she just would, that's what she would do. She'd just run across a place, she'd streak. And it was funny, but at the same time, it was like, put some clothes on. And then, obviously making fun of her, calling her the streaker that came down. And probably wasn't very supportive for her, right?
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. These sort of like these ways that we learn to relate to the body, because if the peak experience, the peak sexual experience, is completely dissolving boundaries, so you can merge with another person. If you have all these mental concepts about your body, could it become so rigid that you can't even allow those boundaries to come down?
Yeah.
So there are benefits. The benefits to having a strong second chakra is creating a distinct boundary between self and other, of, this is me and this is not me. But the merging of the second chakra is completely letting those boundaries dissolve. So much about how we learn to relate, you know so much of this conditioning, how we live our lives today, came from what we inherited when we were younger.
Right.
Specifically when I think that the second chakra just carries the most wounding. But pleasure is a human birthright. We are meant to feel good, but we have to come into awareness of the balance, like what that would be like for us in a balanced way. Can I have how much is enough money, right? And how much people, it's like that desire for more, 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 more. What's next? What's better? That's a a symptom of a second chakra that's out of balance. So what would the experience of a balanced, like what's a balanced second chakra to you? Like what is that, like what's that feel like?
Relative to money or just in general?
Both.
Right. In thinking about that, it's kind of having that second chakra in a harmonious flow for me is balancing the boundaries, creativity, being able to explore, try new things, whether it's art in a sexual situation or with money, whatever, just doing different things in my business, right? Creating. I love being in that creative space. So there's the creative element to it, and then there's also that confidence element of the second chakra that ends up going into the third, right? Your self-confidence, your power center, but in that creative space, there's an empowered confidence, being able to be creative, being fearlessly authentic.
I love that.
And when we look at that in relativity to other people, bringing other people into that space, I always go back to those three things. You want to feel safe and secure. If you feel safe and secure, you can be yourself with someone else and in that vulnerable state. And when you're in that vulnerable state, to be able to be yourself, you'll need to feel empowered versus having control or needing to be controlled. So being empowered, embracing someone else, there you're elevating each other, you're empowering each other to be in spaces and holding space that if you do explore some new area, then it's okay because you belong. You're safe, secure. You're with someone else that's going to be able to, accept you for who you are, and you're empowering each other.
So it all comes down to those core fundamental necessities for
Everything
human
does.
beings. Yeah, it can all tie back to that. So do you think like having a healthy relationship to the core of yourself is pivotal for a healthy relationship with another being, whether that's in relationship or whether that's the sexual experience? It's just if you have a core relationship with you and you love you and you feel good about you, and that doesn't always mean the physical expression of you, but really like the core, the soul self. And that kind of ties into the whole shift in consciousness, is shifting.
It's knowing yourself.
And
That all
yeah.
comes back down to knowing yourself. If you know who you are and you explore at deeper and deeper levels, I talk to my clients like it's a diving board. right? So when you have to get in the water first and learn how to swim, right? And so when you're in there and you're learning and you're experiencing, that's just gathering information and experiencing something. But then when you get into, okay, here's this diving board thing, and you walk out on the edge and I'm supposed to dive in there. When you first learn, you usually are just standing at the edge and you dive forward and just let yourself fall in. You have to trust yourself enough to take that first plunge, right? And then when you start learning that and it gets fun, then you do tricks and things like that, and you get experienced and you get confident, and then guess what happens? Now we're going up 10 feet and taking a diving board off of 10 feet, and then it starts it all over again. This is the shift. This is how it works. And if you keep going up, now you can go up to this diving board that's way high up there, and it gets flimsier, right? It's not as steady as being so low. And then every time you go up, guess what you're doing? You're diving deeper. So each time there's new heights and new depths that you're going to.
It's like expanding your capacity for experience of, like, I love that too, like the polarity of it. The higher you go, the deeper you can go, and so you kind of create this this just larger, capacity for experience. And isn't that what we're here to do, right? We talk about that too, like this this idea of spiritual perfection, or like people who are on a spiritual path thinking that they're somehow going to achieve this level of, like, we're never going to get to perfection. We're meant to experience contrast. I love that analogy. Really made me think about that, of sort of like this polarity of the human experience. And that's actually the epitome of the second chakra. It's like the second chakra introduces us into duality. It's like some things feel good, other things feel bad. There is a self and there is an other. There's a positive and there's a negative. The second chakra is all about duality.
And why does something feel bad? It's an alert system to tell you that something's out of harmony. So hey, check yourself. What does this mean for me?
Yes.
And when you look at it and you dive in, you can understand something new.
Absolutely. And how do we relate to our own emotions? That's like when the second chakra is being developed, is early on in life, when we are just learning how to emote and what our emotions actually mean. And so a lot of this is, just like sex, is biological and instinctual. The expression of emotion, of expressing when something feels good or pleasurable, or when something feels bad. We don't think about it at that age. We just express it. But what happens usually is there's a conditioning associated with it. God forbid you touch yourself in public when you're little, you get shamed, right? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, that must be bad, so I shouldn't do that. And so we get all these associated ideas with just expression. And now we've got a whole host of adults who don't know how they feel, because when they were little and they expressed how they felt, it was maybe rejected. Like, think about all the, oh, boys don't cry. Right? But they do, because they're human and emotion is human. And so now you've got a bunch of humans who don't know how to emote, who don't know how to feel. And so we're all so part of the second chakra is relating to self. How do I, a massive part of the shift is reclaiming, who am I as a holistic being, imperfect, but also spiritually flawless.
Right.
And how do we bring those things into a harmonious, energetic flow, like we talk about? It's part of the journey, right?
It is part of the journey, and just really experiencing things and getting real with yourself is super important. I find that people tend to stifle their emotions, and then they dissociate, and then they can't find themselves back again for a while until they get real with themselves and experience the emotions. We stuff them down instead of releasing them, and that's part of the process, is allowing them to come up. Many times I'm like, I haven't done my job if I haven't made somebody cry. in a good way or in a releasing way. It's all good, right? And it's like you can cry because you're happy. You can cry because you're sad. You can cry because it's a release of emotions that no longer need to be stuck inside your body. If you look at it as this is just a temporary way to express something and say, I'm done with this, and let it go.
That's what one of the key pieces too to bringing balance to the second chakra is getting movement back in your life, in your emotions, in your energy. It's like the second chakra is associated with the element of water, and if we observe water is if water stays still, it stagnates. And the same thing with humans. If we don't change, if we don't flow, we stagnate. So some of the things that we can do energetically to bring balance to the second chakra, to our sensate system, is movement, flow, good sex with good people, with dance, creativity, anything that creates an expression of self. Energy moving through the individual is the expression of self, and being able to, so sometimes it's like, writing or dancing or journaling or get in the water, swim, move your body. And all of a sudden, what a lot of people find is that emotions that have been stuck for like lifetimes, if they start moving, they start doing yoga, all of a sudden, like they're like, oh, I'm just like feeling all this stuff.
Right.
Because human beings we're meant to live sensate lives. We're meant to experience pleasure. We're meant to experience emotion. It's a fundamental part of who we are. And if we get all jacked up because we've got these dissociative beliefs about, you know what I mean?
Everything.
Yeah, our rights, like our human rights to experience pleasure, then you've got the extreme, which is trauma and wounding from one person at the hands of another person. Or you've got the ultimate light side of it, which is two opposites who can come together to experience a sacred unity. And like both of these experiences are available to humans and a whole range in between, because humans are here to experience reality. This is the fun part of this stuff, is the curiosity, is like starting to ask and really observe self. Like you had said, cultivate a relationship to self. How do you relate to your own emotions? How did you get programmed around sex, around money, around pleasure? Do you feel as though you've cultivated a healthy relationship to it? Or is it excessive? Is it insatiable? Is it needy? Is it people-pleasing? Like,
That's a big one.
I think self-reflection, would you say that self-reflection is pivotal to a shift into higher consciousness?
Yes. Self-reflection and exploration, because what are your limits, right? Because if you reflect on who you are, understand what your values are, what is it that you want to create? So many people know what they don't want in life, and they are completely unaware of what they really truly desire. And that's one of the things that I focus on, because in order to know what you want, you have to gain clarity and focus. And the only way to gain clarity and focus is to understand who you are, what are your values, because whatever it is that you value, you're going to prioritize. And when you understand what your priorities are, then you can figure out if that's in alignment with who you are and what you want to create. Because as you said, if we are here to experience reality, what reality do you want to create? Because you have the power to create whatever reality you want to experience. And through that exploration of the self, and through gaining that clarity and understanding what it is to be aligned, everything unfolds so easily when you bring all this into alignment. It doesn't even have to be a balance, because a balancing act is an act, right? And that's why I say harmony a little bit more than I'll say balance, because when we balance, you take something else on, what are you going to drop everything else? But we can take something on and it can disrupt a flow for a little bit, can disrupt the harmony until things are brought back into that harmony by shifting some things around, right?
Absolutely. It made me think, what you just said too made me think about how important it is for people to reconnect to how they feel. Because if you don't know how you actually feel, how
Yes.
can you know what you value? So
Exactly.
like, how can you get, and then if you don't know what you value, how can you cultivate a life that's actually enjoyable to you? So recovering all of the things that we talked about today, like recovering that connection to your own emotions, to your own right to pleasure, to your own values, those things are imperative to the shift, because if not, how do you know that the life that you're creating is the one that's for you and not this idealized life that you created in your head based off your programming?
Or what people expect from you, which goes back to your programming, right?
Exactly. Maybe the shift is just about deciding what type of reality we would choose to experience. And to kind of tie back in with what we were saying earlier, is life happening to me? Is it happening for me, or is it happening through me? And if you're in alignment with yourself, with your right to experience a pleasurable life, and with your values, and like, if you're in alignment with those things, your life is going to reflect something that you genuinely
Right.
enjoy. And I think that's, like, at least for me, that's a huge part of why I love to have these conversations, because I love to invite people into the vibration and the energy of joy and conscious creativity and cultivating happiness. Because for us, this is it. Or
Yeah. Yeah.
I love this shift.
Me too.
And we want you to love the shift too. And that's why we want to bring you along for the ride every week for new videos. So make sure that if you haven't yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the notification bell, so then you will know every time Nicole and I are talking shift.
Yes.